He studied at the University of Venice, where he got his PhD in history of architecture. He taught in Camerino, Bologna, and currently in Ferrara. He collaborated to the 14th International Architectural Biennale of Venice, directed by Rem Koolhaas, and to Agora in Bordeaux. He collaborated with various magazines, such as Log, Domus, and Italian newspapers and magazine. In 2015, he published with Yona Friedman The Dilution of Architecture, which contains his essay on the erratic universe of Yona Friedman, which is the subject of today's lecture. So Manuel, I appreciate actually his work as a writer and as a polemist, of course, and he's actually being repellent to the obvious and the mainstream. And he once told me jokingly that history is either revisionist or is not. And I think that sets the tone as to what we can expect today from Manuel's lecture. So please help me welcome Manuel Orazi.
My essay was the result of a PhD, as usually happens. The PhD becomes a book, but in this case became a double book, in the sense that the Dilution of Architecture has two parts. The first part is an auto-anthology of Yona Friedman's works. The second part is my essay, as I was saying. This is more an historical tone. And the book is edited by Nader Serai, who was a former AA student, and it was produced by EPFL, the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, by the Galerie Archizoom, which is inside the school. So just to give you this. The PhD was done in 2007, exactly 10 years ago, and then after a long process, it became this study. I'm particularly happy, glad to present here the book, because Yona Friedman used to attend the AA. He did two important lectures here, one where the archigrams, for example, were still students, and so he tried also to move to London in a certain point, but I would like to start really describing you the structure of my book, who is taking the title from a book by Yona Friedman, who was about physics, and I hope it illustrates clearly. Also, it is a reflex of his long career, and Erratic is also an homage. It's not only, related to his, because he was born and lived in 3 different continents and worked. So it's also an homage, but it's also an homage to his origins. So I would start from the beginning. The book is divided in 3 chapters, 3 big parts. The first part is about the early years of Yona Friedman. This is a picture of Budapest in 1923, the year when Yona was born, as János Antal Friedman. Budapest is a capital on the Danube, whereas I like this image which combined the modernity of the bridge, one of the first European bridge in steel, with the hydro airplanes that at the time was quite common in Europe. Something of Le Corbusier. And Hungary was had a very special political regime, in the sense that the chief of the state was an authoritarian politician, but a military man, but not exactly a dictator. He was an admiral, and this is funny because Hungary has no property on the sea, has no more, because that was something coming from the First World War, when after the First World War, Hungary was reduced by 2/3 of his territory. But he had a very big, and of course this authoritarian regime that has been defined as false fascism, in the sense that was related to Germany. It was allied with Germany, but has a certain autonomy. That allowed a certain amount of freedom, of internal freedom, until and during the Second World War. Jano Chantal Friedman, as I was saying, was born in a Jewish family, and there was a very big community of merchants and lawyers and professions in Budapest, especially. This is a drawing, an engraving by Chagall that I like very much because it's related to movement. Movement, of course, is something like a fil rouge in Yona Friedman's career, and it's also, of course, has a legacy with it's a Jewish issue of Jewish tradition, of course, and I like this image of a walking village, sort of an archigram ante litteram of the 20s, 40 years before. And as I was saying, Friedman, because he was Jewish, had to face racial laws that was forbidding him to attend the university, the Polytechnic School of Architecture and Engineering, but he had a special permission to attend the lessons without the possibility to obtain a degree or an official recognition. So he started to profit of the few occasions that the common life in Budapest could offer him, like two important lectures by Werner Heisenberg, which were done in 1941 and then in 1943. Why? Because during the war, this neutral, as Hungary was allied with Germany, but practically was neutral, much more like Switzerland. So that's allowed some people, still the activity in the university were going on quite normally. So Heisenberg went lecturing. He did two lectures. The one was about the theory of color of Goethe. And that was very important for Friedman because Heisenberg was defending very much abstract knowledge. He was defending theory, especially. And you know that physics usually communicates through mathematics, through formulas. But that was not the case only by Heisenberg, because Heisenberg used also a second canal of language, which was a traditionally philosophical, very easy language. So it has a double production of formulas for physics and lecture for everybody. That's something that was very influential to Friedman, who is among the very few architects who wrote two books on physics, and it's quite unique, I would say, among architects mostly. And of course, Heisenberg is the theoretician of the quantum theory. He got the Nobel Prize in 1927, and then the quantum theory, among his principles, has the point that it's impossible to forecast, to make a precise prediction of what's going to happen after an experiment, because the presence of man always influence badly and deform an experiment, and it was something who will have very great consequences, especially in the vision and idea of Yona Friedman about the city. Another fundamental experience that was the possibility for Friedman to attend a course, the last course that the great philosopher and expert in mythology of Hungarian origins, Károly Kerényi, that gave in 1943. He was an opponent of the regime, but was a conservative opponent, not a leftist opponent. So a special kind of opposite. He was he left Hungary at the end of 1943 forever. He always lived in Switzerland, but he decided to give a last course, very much attended in a cinema of Budapest, where everybody could get with no restriction, and also, for example, an assistant of Carl Gustav Jung went there, but you know, Kerényi had epistolary relationship with one of the most important, with some of the most important European intellectuals, like Thomas Mann, like Carl Gustav Jung, and also Hermann Hesse, but there are also many others, because because he really was the most important expert in mythology, especially Greek mythology. And this course gave to Yona Friedman a great thought, a great, let's say, a concept that he cultivated very much. The fact that mythology is always an expression of a collective psychology, and that is true also not only for the Greek myths, but also to face the contemporary myths that we everyday myths, like the myth of technology, of flexibility, of mobility, or etc. So myths are not gone. It's not something in the past. They are always going on, and they are always expression of a collective psychology in a certain context. Of course, the Hungarian scenario in architecture is very interesting. It's not very well studied. There are not very much studies, but for sure there were relevant, absolutely relevant personalities in coming from Hungary or working in Hungary as architects. These are the 4 Hungarian architects in the Bauhaus, of course, above all, Laszlo Molinaghi and Marcel Breuer. This is a picture of 1924 when Yona was 1 year old, a book designed by Molinaghi. Not only was doing the book, was designing, no? The 12 or 13 Bauhaus book, each one of it are a masterpiece of graphic design, of architectural thinking, etc. Then there were Marcel Breuer. Then there was, Farkas Molnar, who is an interesting architect because we're animating this magazine, Teres Forma, which means space and shape and form, that was publishing the most, was introducing the Bauhaus and the modernist architecture into Hungary, especially you see on the left, also with some contradiction, because you see an Orientalist architecture, but it's interesting for us because it's the architecture of Kocma Lajos, an architect where Yona made an internship during his year at the Polytechnic in Budapest. Yona Friedman is at the extreme right below in the pipeline. Oh, yes, this is Ivan Kotsis, who was not exactly a modernist, but he was the professor who gave him the permission to attend the university because he decided he was a clever guy. But I would say Kocma Lajos was this modernist architect, fellow of another architect, who was dividing his modernity, he was applying modernity to his architecture, and was expressing his, his decorative, I would say post-secessionist taste into wood engraving and furniture. So he has a sort of Adolf Loosian attitude of dividing very much the decoration as a private activity. I show you this wood engraving because also decoration for textile decoration of furnitures. This is a picture of Kocma Lajos because Friedman spent 1 year in his studio when there was no job because there was the war and the constructions were stopped basically. But it was very important to start thinking in architecture in an extremely minoritarian way. Because, of course, the Polytechnic has a positivist engineering vision of architecture and traditionalist, if you want, but he could get information and had the taste of the Bauhaus or something going around, and also a certain taste for decoration, for ornament, divided from architecture. So something that was personal, that was helpful for him. Here are some projects by Kocma. And this is a book by Kocma in 1941, Germanized in Ludwig because it was published in Zurich in 1941. So the new house has something to do with freedom, with high space, even if a small building on the Danube for holiday. But of course, it was important. These are an example of the book, which is a beautiful book, not well known, but quite interesting. But of course, Hungary was not I would say an easy place to stay for a Jewish community. It was active since the 40s. The Arrow Cross Party was a really fanatic, extremely fanatic party, and mostly the situation collapsed when it became very difficult, very dangerous in the second part of 1944, so at the very end of the war. So relatively until the first part, the first 6 months of 1944, life was going on quite, yes, there were the Russia laws, there were some violence by the Arrow Cross Party, but Horthy was controlling these fanatics, even if it was not certainly a great democratic man. But after 1944, the Nazis wanted to take control of the country. They took the Horthy's son in order to force him to renounce to the control of the country. And then they arrived, they took the control, they put the Arrow Cross Party and Zalazi as a chief and started immediately the violence against the Jewish community. But most of all, Adolf Eichmann personally moved to Budapest to organize the fastest and biggest deportation of people of all the time. 500,000 people taken from Budapest to Auschwitz in 2 months under the bomb. It was also a logistic masterpiece because there was only one line going to the north, to Poland, and it was very difficult. You can see Eichmann in Budapest on the right with his suite, Nazi suite. Yona Friedman took part to a minor Zionist group of resistance of young people where it was as a special way of communicating. That was also a very interesting experience for him, was very like a footstep for him, because they knew only 2 other members of the group, but not the whole group. So that if they were taken in prison, like he was in the end, they were allowed to reveal who were the other 2, so that the Nazi couldn't find in any case the complete map of the group. That's an interesting way of communication because it was done in the same way for the independence of Algeria 20 years after. That was copied, literally. If you see the film by Gillo Pontecorvo, The Battle of Algeria, you will find it the same way, even in the difference of the context and of the political situation. But that was about communication, because also communication was an issue of Yona Friedman, surely. But that was Budapest, of course, after the war. The war also started very late, but also finished very quickly in the very first day of January of 1945. And Friedman had the chance to survive the Holocaust because he was imprisoned as a political activist, as a political resistant, and not as a Jew. That's why he was safe and could escape thanks to the quick arrival of the Red Army from Russia. If you have read some novel by Sandor Marai that are translated in English, you will perfectly find know the situation in that very crazy and not crazy, in that very special days and very nervous days with extremely many problems. But Friedman decided to leave Hungary because he assisted to the collapse of a whole society. The Jewish community was no more present, practically, and everything changed. Plus, there was the menace of arriving, the Russian already arrived, so there was the clear perspective of a Russian control of the country, something that happened exactly. So he decided to move to Palestine as a Zionist, even if denied clearly he was going to Palestine, as we are going to see. But going to Palestine was not so easy because the immigration was forbidden, and ironically, he went there not through, it was exactly the situation like now, but upside down. If you think that Syrian people come here through Italy from east and then goes up toward Germany or England, at the time the movement was the contrary. They was passing as usually through Italy, from Trieste and Genoa. They survived the two camps, passed from Trieste and Genoa with ships to Palestine. That at the time was a British mandate. So he had a British control who was forbidding it. But before to go in that, he stopped for 1 year in Bucharest. In Bucharest, in Romania, because in the Jewish agency, the Zionist agency, had an important place there. It was more easy to get permission to arrive to Palestine. But meanwhile, he faced the experience to be a refugee. And being a refugee, personally, as an architect, also make your mind think and work. And his very first project was done as a refugee in Bucharest. And this is the panel chain. It was a very simple project of paravan, of panel chain, then retake it. Because of course, when you are a refugee, you are in a condition of, you have a need for privacy for the several families or group of people that you are with in sharing a space. But also, you need, you are in a condition when every day somebody arrives and somebody else is gone. So every day there is an alteration, there is a flexible condition of people in the same space that they are forced to share. So you need new instruments, new ideas, because you cannot use, of course, the way of living in a bourgeois building of Budapest or wherever you was before. So you need also to think about how to move implants, not only privacy, but because you have several families, so you need more than one kitchen, more than one shower, and most of all, you focalize what is that you need. It was very much about it. What you need when you are a refugee, the first thing is not money, it's not food, it's water, because water has more than one function. Anyway, in 1946, he started to get, when you see the red titles, they are the small chapter inside the three big parts. This was also very interesting for me to study the situation in Palestine, in Israel, between and after the foundation of the state, because it was also, to face one of the three great ideologies of 20th century, a minor but important almost and very controversial, of course, but also very plural at the time, that was Zionism. Friedman could know a very special and unique political and architectural experience. It was to move in a kibbutz. And kibbutz was not only a specific social utopia achieved in Palestine, was also mostly an alternative to urban life, an alternative to the city. It was really a radical experience, because the people who joined the kibbutz didn't want to live in the city, but was a critique from the left, was not a critique from the right. The city is the place of merges, of mixity, of many races, where minorities historically can live, like Jews, like any kind of minority. But kibbutz was alternative. This is not a kibbutz, but the majority, the few architects that were all from Europe, especially from Germany, like Richard Kaufmann, they were linked to the city garden movement. And this that you see, it's not a kibbutz, it's a meshavim, it's a meshav. It's different, it's slightly different, because it allowed a certain amount of private property. But it maintains a utopist shape, like Palma Nova or a Renaissance city, in a way, because it's circle, and circle, of course, it's a perfect form. And you see all these small houses around the internal circle, where you can commerce toward the center and cultivating outside. So they're very rational and schematic and idealistic base concept, and this is a picture, and you see also the developing of the center. It was done in the first 20s. Kaufman did also a plan for Haifa, which was the city the most near of the kibbutz that Yona Friedman joined. But you know, of course, this experience, this great heterogeneity of architectural experience, projects, and people going around, of course, was extremely stimulating. Also, you know that the plan of Tel Aviv of the 20s was done by Patrick Geddes himself, stopping by from England to India and back. So there was this contradiction of modern building in a Bauhaus style versus a city garden, more conservative plan of the city. And these are famous, interesting and funny, you know, there are two photo montages of Haifa, the city where Yona was gone. On the right, done by the Zionists, were underlying the modernity of Haifa as a port, but with also camels, because it was a sort of Europe in Asia. And the other one on the left is the famous photo montage by the Nazi against the Weissenhof in Stuttgart. So you see the same result by such an opposite political point of view. And there were many European, as I was saying, German Jewish architects like Adolf Reiding working very much on prefabrication, House Palestine 1937, and some eccentric project where Mendelssohn doesn't look like Mendelssohn. He was the only architect who was not doing curves in Israel. Everybody was imitating Mendelssohn in Europe, but he was doing differently. But apart of that, there were many interesting architects like Arieh Sharon, a former Bauhaus student, who was using also the ideology of the kibbutz for metaphors like the bee house, etc., with a Bauhaus graphic design. But you know, the kibbutz, this is Ratner, who was at the time the dean of the Technion Polytechnical School, where Yona Friedman joined immediately to end his studies, who was a conservative and a designer of kibbutz and new settlements, which are slightly different. Also for the propaganda, you see the very simple form of installation with a tower for water and for military control immediately. I don't want to spend too much time, but I mean, of course, it was a very hard life in a kibbutz because you were working every day, and you know, private property was totally abolished. And in some kibbutz, you always renounced to the property of the children. They were raised up together. They were not living with the parents. So it was something as much as possible close to the most radical form of socialism, but realized, not imagined, but with a great difference with Russia that was on a voluntary base, it was not imposed, and that's fundamental, of course. Yona Friedman this is the document of 1946. Kfar Glickson is the name of the kibbutz. Of course, is also part of the culture of Israel that at the time was not existing, but also he went there when joining. To me, I cannot find underline how Martin Buber's idea that was a sort of permanent contestator of the state of Israel when it became the idea of Buber with the idea of Friedman. Even there are no proofs they met, but surely Paths in Utopia was published in 1947. It's really an alternative vision of Zionism. It's what is what's called the cultural Zionism. That was Zionism who was theorizing the necessity of two people in the same state. So not against, when we talk about Israel, it's also we say two people, two state. No, the idea of the Buber way, the cultural Zionism, one state, two people, different community in a same state. And that's what something was surely a possibility that has been removed, abandoned, even if sometimes comes up. But also it's the reason why many people left Israel many Jewish people left Israel. That's also a taboo there to say, but there are really many more, very much like Yona Friedman. And this is you know, the kibbutz with writing in Hungarian, because there were really many. This is a plan of the kibbutz where Yona Friedman stayed, Kfar Glickson, but designed by Arya Sharon in a totally different way than Kaufman, in a Bauhaus way, more extremely simple and dry, if you want, but extremely rational, but no more circle and no utopian. We have really a change in this, even in the plan. And these are the prefabricated building, because prefabrication was the issue also in the thought, in the teachings, in all the courses of the Technion University. And these, of course, were the famous image by Robert Capa of the arrival, you know, Theodoret's ships, the daily arrival of the immigrants from Europe. Theodoret's, by the way, the founder of the Zionist ideology, through two books, The Jewish State and Alte Neue Land, which was a utopist novel that translated means Tel Aviv in Hebrew. So Alte Neue means, Tel Aviv means new old country, new old land. As I was saying, Theodoret's was born in Budapest. He was there for 18 years old before moving to Vienna. So just to say how important was Hungary for this context. And apart, I mean, the sociological and historical importance of this picture is interesting for us to see again the daily life of refugees, because Palestine at the time was a unique place and a founding country founded on immigration, not against immigration like every country we know traditionally. You see some prefabricated system in aluminum, very simple on the left, and the daily. And with prefabrication, with immigration, with temporary houses and temporary cities, that's what's also about so important. Faced two important figures like Alexander Klein, who was a teacher there in Technion, coming from Germany, and Munio Gitai Weinrab, who was also the father, by the way, of the Israeli director Amos Gitai, who, and you can see Kiryat Yam, a suburb of Haifa, with this temporary neighborhood. There are simply boxes where people can move and can stay for a few weeks and move in. So these were the architectural urban problem that the school and the architects were discussing there, but it was not isolated, because of course prefabrication and the problem of joining living for a few weeks in a place and then to move was a problem in many parts of post-war countries, like in Japan and in Europe. I show you very quickly these sophisticated analysis by Alexander Klein. He used to teach there in the Technion, who was this Orientalist building built on the left. These were, you see, very sophisticated and very important, I think, also to feel, to understand the tone and of the teaching at the Technion in those years, because they are extremely different, very sophisticated, because it's always about movement or space in architecture, in social housing, standardized flats. It analyzes movement in the first level through diagrams, so in a very conceptual, in a way of representation taken from the war basically. In the second level, it's only about the space you go through to go out or inside, so the moving space, let's say. And the third one is the internal space. It's like a negative analysis of space. I think it's there are three different levels. There are others, very different, but it really gives you makes me, I mean, I think it was such an interesting figure, Alexander Klein. And also it's considered the very first scientific architect in a way, because it has this unique capacity of analyzing architecture, even the very simple architecture, in so many different ways that in every time it looks like another project, another plan, even if it's always the same, of course. And Friedman went again going on with projects of flexible spaces with as a student, then as an assistant in Haifa at the Technion, where the propaganda building. But you see, because of course it was a context of many new towns, especially after. And this was, you know, those boxes, those movable boxes. That is the title of many projects of Yona. Were literally there. You see, it seems so easy. It seems so spontaneous. It seems really just with a glue, like we were used to see, only to think about in the 60s, about prefabrication, capsule, etc., as we're going to see very quickly. But Friedman was also forced to stop for a second time his studies for another war, the war for the independence of the State of Israel, and he was commissioned to do trenches. And to do trenches, it's also something really particular, because you need to face with something that for its own nature has to move, because the front necessarily move in any war, in any time. So you have to face with the representation and conception of an infrastructure in movement. For all of his life, Yona said that even streets and infrastructure should move, bridges, everything should move. And I do think it was so connected. This is a picture of Yona Friedman with in the army in the War of 48, and this again the propaganda, how trench was also a symbolic and political topos for this founding state. This is the declaration with a picture of Robert Capa, that, as you know, of course, was the famous photographer of the Omaha Beach arrival of the Americans. And this is a picture of Haifa, who was very leftist and open. It's still one of the more multicultural cities of the region. Again, with some picture of the day, because for years the immigrants arrived every day, and Yona Friedman always said that what he knew there was something as much as possible close to a classless society. Everybody was informal in suites, and also in mods. Everybody was calling the others only by name, for example. And another condition that he was facing is about the scarcity of water. There were many pipelines that soon will inform the architecture of Friedman. Seeing an abandoned pipeline, Friedman was conceiving this project. It was the first published in Europe on l'architecture d'aujourd'hui in 1953, and this was about the recycling of an infrastructure for doing temporary houses. So, recycle, there are also things that we know. Or prefabrication, again, that like everybody at the time, a single element in concrete multiplied and assembled on variation on the theme of temporary houses. This is a picture with Golda Meir, but another, I spent very much time in analyzing the formative years of architects, for once because I think they are fundamentals for understand architects. Also is the place where they experiments, they do contradictory experience, and also they are looking for their identity, for building up also their project. So they're very catchy, they're very looking around as students are. And this also was, for me, extremely interesting to study the work of Konrad Wachsmann, who was visiting professor in Haifa between 1953 and 1954, because Wachsmann founded Gropius, the general panel system, the General Panel Corporation, when he moved to USA, where Gropius was dean at Harvard, by the way, and Rainer Bana commented so so harshly in his style the failure of their company for the production of prefabricated houses that you can mount by yourself in your house. It was a total economical disaster because it was too much difficult, the junction of the panels. It was extremely difficult to build up this self-planned book. But the course of Wachsmann was about his great projects for the Air Force, for the American Air Force during the war, especially hangars for the greatest plane and always, never done before. These are some images of these projects of hangar that Friedman could look, and that has surely excited his imagination because he could immediately imagine to place those temporary houses inside this structure that was composed only by a singular element multiplied to the infinite in many variations. So that I'm telling you because it was nice to discover that after 2 years, Wachsmann did the same course as a visiting professor in Tokyo, and he had the metabolists as students, Kurokawa, Kikutake, etc. So it's one of many cases of a parallel development of a same idea, but it's not exactly the same because declinated differently for different contexts. I tell you this because as an historian, I'm contrary to the hagiography. You know that when you do a monographic study, you are always tempted to get in love with your subject. And Tafuri taught us in Venice that we should study on the edge between participation and critique. So like we are external people and we know feeling and cold blood. But it's true that I do believe that history is especially the aim of history of architecture to reconstruct the context. Because in the context we can find not simply influences, but we really can find how much is difficult architecture, how you are looking for ideas, and you are, even if you have the most different personality, you very much face the same problem, and you find different solution, or sometimes the same if you can stand each other. The problem with the project by Wachsmann were joints. Wachsmann is a fantastic designer of joints. Is a sort of sculpture of joints. These are only 3, there are many more, were extremely difficult to assemble again. And that's why these big structures then were never realized, also one of the reasons why. But they were enough for opening up a possibility of architecture, both in Yona Friedman's way and in Japan. And finally, I would say the final formative experience, of course, it was also the passing by experience, was the one of held in Europe in 1956, when Yona Friedman, as many other architects, joined the last CIAM in Dubrovnik, where came up the Team 10, led by Ellison and Peter Smithson and many others. But it was a moment where he saw that his ideas, that at the time were opposed by the actual dean in the Technion, who changed, it was no more Ratner, it was Alfred Moyner, was totally contrary to Yona Friedman ideas about mobility, because he was a more traditional Bauhaus architect. He found an audience. He found, especially among German architects. In fact, the first article that Friedman will publish will be on Bauwelt, which is an historical magazine still existing in 1957. And he presented this document that is called the Settlement Revolution, which is not only a document about planning, about building, but it's a document that has a lot to do with his experience. He said that user determination makes settlement work. User determination is better than governmental planning. User determination solves problems government cannot solve. I mean, if you think to earthquake, disaster area, wherever in place in Italy, I come from a region of Italy where we have faced the earthquake last year, everything is blocked, nothing is happening for 5 bureaucracy fightings and problems, etc. These are really shocking to me, but still, because they are not so historically relevant. It has, of course, an anarchic tone also, but they are really, they're trying to find a new role of the architect. It's not only about architecture in general. It's clearly Yona Friedman was looking for a new role, a transformation of the profession. Not just a designer with a tie, was really another interpretation of the role of the architect, somebody who goes on the spot, who is always on the spot, doesn't draw something far away and abstractly from the site and from the people who are there. So it's clearly coming up also the issue of participation, which is another constant theme among the many work by Yona Friedman. And in the second chapter, which now is very much more quick, about theories, society and technology, of course, he moved because he has this problem. He was not teaching anymore there. He was pushed away by Neumann, saying, well, this is really not architecture, that's not architecture. He published his first ideas in this interesting, it's not a book, it's not a magazine. It was also at the very beginning, before photocopy, it was Edition Polycopier. L'architecture mobile, very simple instrument that was easy to be reproduced and even by hand, on the spot, personally, in the event like this one, we had the chance to discuss his idea. And I would like to underline how his naive way of drawing, so naive that seems like a kid did, we cannot say it was by a kid because it possesses a very sophisticated tone because it's not, because it is a section. He has, section. You arrive to the section only after the plan and the facade. So this is a really conceptual. What I like is the conceptual atmosphere of the Ville Spatiale, which is already present by section in the cover, even if you have not this impression. And this is one of the very first project for the zone of Bercy in Paris, where you have these, they were about to demolish the area, the old market, for doing social housing, for the great exigencies of course, of housing. He proposed to, let's maintain everything, let's build up this structure with a project which looks like the Smithson in Berlin, I would say, of those years, very much with 3 kind of space. Housing, civic centers, and decks. Decks, let's say, mostly. So there lies the street deck by the Smithson. And the idea of Yona, you see they are living in the beginning together this idea of going tridimensionally up with serving with 2 kinds of architecture. A serving architecture, the pillars with all the implants and the elevator, and the served architecture, who are the units, the cellular elements that stays still on the background. So in the previous way and in a new way, developing it like a new Venice. Taking Venice as a model was also an homage to Le Corbusier, who remained, of course, the main reference because, Le Corbusier wrote, I take Venice as a timone, I don't know, but in the ship, okay, he elected Venice as because one of the main utopia of modernism was dividing vehicular traffic from people traffic, and that's why Venice remains the utopia for Le Corbusier and for the modernists, because it's the only town where you really have people walking separately from the cars. So this research goes on very fast, very quickly, with many people around in public occasion, never in the university at the time, but in public lecture, in assemblies of architects, of planners, and it developed very quickly. Cité spatiale, ville spatiale, urbanisme tridimensionnel, tridimensional planning, etc. See, these are drawings by Yona Friedman in the Getty, facing the different solution for the great number, the so-called issue of the great cities, to living on many people going to the cities from the countryside, and after the war, there were really great internal migrations. The solution by Fuller, the solution by Fraiotto, was also the solution, the crazy solution by Werner Runau and Yves Klein of a roof made by air. These are quite well-known project. And this is the solution by Yona Friedman, again, so bisection, so simple, but so strong conceptually, so weak in terms of representation, but so strong and solid in terms of concept. Because you see how his idea connects with the existing network of the metro, and goes far away, goes much more behind the intensification of the city, which remains the ville spatiale, but also with internal, you see the internal railways and autoroute, like in the Plano Bus by Le Corbusier in the late 30s, but also with urban agriculture, because only urban agriculture suspended will be safe in case of emergency. So this was around between the end of the 50s, the beginning of the 60s. And so the very first maquette, so poor, again, materially poor. Probably if you do a maquette like this, you will not pass your examination here at the AA, but they are the frag center, but so strong in concept. Sorry. It's a drawing by, in the moment when you see the indifference of the ville spatiale to the context, but because it is preserving it. On the left, you have a classic Haussmann block, residential. On the right, you have an industrial artisanal area. So it's really the intensification of the city is indifferent to the city, and it is maintaining it, what is this. This is a plan for Tunis. It was the only project at the time who was considering of conserving the Medina. All the other projects were about demolishing it, of the competition. And you see how with very simple roofs, representational capacity, I mean, even if it's hand-done sketches, it's done in negative, the sky and the volumes, but it's quite efficient, I would say. And in around 1964, it becomes like the maximum point of expansion of this idea, creating a linear city, bridge cities, and even if it was not alone. This is where the group, the Architektur Mobile, the group of study he founded with these minor architects like Emmerich, Trappmann, Soltan, Frieden, Ogem, Kühne, Gunschel from Germany, Poland, and Holland, with their program, even if the group was soon, and that was Yves Klein with Werner Runau, closed in 1962. This is a compare with a project by Candilis in Frankfurt, the Romberg project, a project very much liked by Kenneth Frampton, by the way. It was comparable to the project of the Friedman. And in 1964, he really presented to the Minister of Public Works in Paris, asked by the minister himself, a project for really an intensification of the city, which in France was mostly thinkable because France is the greatest producer of nuclear power energy still now in Europe, because this kind of intervention, of course, requires a great amount of energy. So it was thinkable like this. But also, what I like, Friedman was extremely going around. I had the chance to meet also the situationists. He had a big clash with Constant. If you read the book by Mark Wigley, you will find letters, because Constant, with his new Babylon structure of suspended city dedicated to play, Friedman said, yes, but play shouldn't be obligatory. You cannot force people to play. And that was very harsh, because it was really not expecting these objections, but it's a sort of regime of dictatorship of play, which I found very interesting. Also, you know, the Huizinga, the theorist of play, was Dutch. No? He had a clash very big by Henri Lefebvre, who accused me to be a reactionary. So Yona Friedman would like that everybody has houses around cities like billionaires, and so will move anytime without doing anything. But anyway, these are very simple, very of projects. A famous one, the one for the Bay of Tokyo, and a less known one by Luigi Pellegrini, a minor Italian architect, of flying bridge cities, only to show how Friedman was not isolated. He was not a visionary architect, because there were plenty of architects who were producing those projects in those years. So you will find a lot of them if you want. And also, as I was saying, as he did a couple of important lectures here in the IAA, also to compare a concept that I like very much about the continent city, Europe as a continent city, the only one who has not developed a megalopolis because of the network of trains. It was also as part of a research on the structure of city that, if you see the project of planning study for national network by Archigram, you can see the direct connection of these interests. Then after the 65, there are minor experience but by Yona with other people who are more, I would say, more lazy, more not fresh ideas, even like Paul Maimont, Paris under the Seine, or Nicholas Schoeffer, who was another sculptor of Hungarian origins, the GIAP. But as Peter Cook wrote in 1970, Yona Friedman has been really the daddy of megastructure that moves on any kind of terrain. It's a sort of tributing the leadership also for the walking cities in a way, which it was part of, you see here all the name of together, utopist, megastructure, architects, etc. But we have to say that no megastructure were realized, and as Rencolas wrote, Yona Friedman's Urbanisme Spatial was emblematic. Bigness floats over Paris like a metallic blanket of clouds, promising unlimited but unfocused potential renewal of everything, but never lands, never confronts, never claims its rightful place. Criticism as decoration. And in fact, Friedman in the 70s changes very much his approach, stopped to focus on technology or to this mystique of technology as a solution for every problem of cities, and started to go more back on the spot, on the ground. This is I wrote a short chapter about the city also because, and the street, sorry, the ideology of the street, because of course is you know that the Smithson is, and also this school that at the time was teaching to design a building as a street, not with that street, but a building as a street. Every single building, every single project should be a street that connected with other part of the town. It was so important as a reference for everybody at the time. And Friedman started to do that also, not only participation, but on the spot, modifying with simply, also with varnish. This is Saint-Germain-des-Prés. But the street, everybody was going on the street. This was also a sort of reaction against the role of traditional architect of the Renewal of the 60s in gray with the tie, designing abstract spaces where nobody wanted to go. It was really also this obsession for connection, for revitalizing the life in the street. And also he moved his attention to another kind of technique that he considered more simple, even if, as it was connected with mathematics, it's quite complex to me, like the flat writer was a sort of computational design, but for promoting the involvement of not expert people in the design process, into the design process. And that's why these drawings were tremendously looking like the smart city, but 50 years before, were noticed by Nicholas Negroponte, who founded in 1967 the architecture group Machine, and was using this book. It is the only one book still now by Yona Friedman translated in English toward a scientific architecture, was containing the flat writer, this system of computational design, for building up the architectural group Machine, which is at the base of the Media Lab that was born only in 1985. Negroponte used Yona, the first software in computer-aided design conceived by Negroponte is called the Yona system, because as he wrote, he developed in this nerdish atmosphere of the architecture machine group, it was a strong criticism of architects. The architects cannot handle the big project anymore, and we need the involvement of people, and to involve them through computer-aided design, building up through diagrams, potato diagrams, and finally getting, after a bubble diagrams, to a plan of a house predetermined on the need of people involved in the process of design. So it was really an ally in the process of modifying the role of the architect. And the final chapter is dedicated about this shift also, the final shift to simple technology by Yona Friedman, that to me is constituted especially from his best book, Feasible Utopias, Utopia Realizable, 1975, which is a book about sociology, which is a book which is not talking about technique. It's about only a technique of language. It's based on the fact that every utopia can be realized if you organize the necessary consensus for doing that. So it's about communication, it's about language, it's about the critical group. That means that communication can work only into a limited group. It's not the myth, it's against the myth of global communication. But it's the shift. I mean, it's not alone, because studying utopia as a small community was extremely common in the 70s. Oswald Matthias Ungers, with his wife Lieselotte, moved to Cornell to study the utopian communities in America. Wrote this very strange book. Dolores Hayden wrote this book about the achievement of communitas, of communitarian socialism in America between the end of the 18th century to 1975. And Yona produced a project, not realized again, were involved for the Dubonnet company doing pastis, where he organized also the meeting of workers deciding their project. I like very much this image with the fur looking for the diagrams that we're saying, with also how to determine the plan. And a high school in Angers with the potato building, the potato and the bubble diagram again. This is the school in Angers, the only building realized by Yona in prefabricated panels, very simple with the possibility of decoration. And these are some pictures of the building, which it's looking like a little bit a Team 10 again project, but was organized only through meetings of the students, the professors, and the parents of the students. When he organized the meeting and went out of the meeting. So that was also about participation. And the very last part of his work is dedicated to UNESCO, where he works for like 20 years. So for countries of the third world, but not only. You can find these two manuals on internet freely, in two PDF, Roofs Part 1. Again, very simple, very poor project and books, but with a very interesting subtitle, Local Materials, Simple Technology, Sophisticated Ideas. That's a sign. I think this is really the style of Yona Friedman. I would spend this difficult word. This is an example of the manual. It was taught. It's not comics. It's a new language, very clear, with no footnotes, no references, taken from the Blackboard activity. Simply, becomes something that could talk even to not expert and not cultivated people, but especially, not alphabetized people, especially in India, for example. He was not alone, because we always remind that everybody is slave of his context and his zeitgeist, like Hassan Fatih, who was doing exactly the same in Egypt and elsewhere. But this is the Museum of Simple Technology in Chennai, at the time Madras, for UNESCO, where the museum becomes an instrument of communication. So not only a pedagogical building, but also an instrument of communication, how to build roofs and how to do architecture by self-planning and do-it-yourself philosophy. And this is a picture of last year of Yona, because hopefully it's very good. In 2 days he's opening up a new installation in Le Grand Palais in Paris, so you can go the day after tomorrow to visit him. But this was yes, and we'll end my presentation with a picture of his beautiful house, completely decorated with very poor object, piece of paper, drawings, rubbish, selected rubbish, small objects taken in Africa and South America and India. This is my first text about, I would say, about Yona, with a picture by Stefano Graziani. It was also his very first work published on Domus. They published his photographs, and they didn't publish my text. So this is a vengeance, I would say. And it's a sort of heart of his work and philosophy, very touching, very, very moving, because it's so coherent with his idealistic and generous activity. And I hope you can discover his work, which for me is still really a minery of ideas of what I like the most in architecture. Is the architecture done by concepts, by ideas that you can grab as a cheese, as you say, Benedetto Croce, take his ideas as like caciocavallo. You can always take and use it if they are good ideas. So it's an invitation to discover Friedman far away from the art world, from the many misinterpretations that he has, like always a new debutant artist, because I think he was much more than this. Thank you very much.